I think the other thing that I would avoid, if it is successful, then you're going to have to be very careful that you don't end up with whatever regulatory body there is thinking, what a wonderful idea, we always knew this would work, let's have 2 or 3 in the one area. That is why commercial radio has been going down the plug hole at a very fast rate of knots. There are far too many radio stations. I mean, 60 to 70% of them are losing money. And the only reason they're still in business is they're owned by private equity companies. My former station by Bauer in Germany, the capital GWR lot by Global, and nobody knows exactly how bad their position is, are the private equity shareholders. The danger of too many stations cannot be overstated. The only answer for commercial radio is something that went through Parliament just a couple of weeks ago, which is a media ownership change, which would allow one operator to own more than one service in the one area, and therefore you can produce genuinely different services because it's in your interest to make them different, and also amortize the costs of news, etc., over 4 or 5 different revenue streams. And that again underlines in my closing remarks the importance of local, because one of the reasons that commercial radio with 380 stations has only a 41% share against the BBC, but 10 years ago with 120 stations it had 51% share and going north at a very fast rate of knots, is that a lot of them have dropped their local content. The one variable in a national spine of owning stations in a lot of different cities was local output, and the accountants who tend to run any organisation after a while thought, right, let's cut that out or reduce it. Now, local news to produce does cost money. Going to have 1 journalist on duty actually requires 4.8 people when you think about it, in terms of a week and 24 hours a day, etc. So it does cost money, and it's an investment that needs to be made. There are various ways in which I think you can look at it more imaginatively by tapping into the immense resource of higher education, which I think is a very fruitful area to look at, but let's be honest, it's got to be temporary because people do want to move on to more highly paid jobs than I would imagine the local television would be able to offer immediately. I'm wary of citizen journalism because for all its faults, and the press are not exactly top of dip grade at the moment, totally unmediated stuff is positively dangerous. The difference between paediatrician and paedophile is something that might elude quite a lot of the population. Anyway, as I say, I'm sorry I'm agnostic. I do genuinely have an open mind, and if you do go ahead, I wish you well, but do please do the sums.
Some members of ULTV, but they're really my views. I'm always very excited about converting skeptics to local TV. Look, Steve asked me if I'd give just a couple of words, a few minutes, talking about why local TV has failed in the UK, and it always occurs to me that when most people get asked to speak at conferences, it's about their successes. When I get asked to speak, it's because it's assumed my area of specialist expertise is failing. But actually, having been involved in local TV for over 10 years, I can talk with some authority about failure of local TV. And it's worth saying, actually, my background was involved in working with a corporate production company, and I was working with ex-ITV producers. And I assumed, and I know that everyone else in this room will know this, but I assumed at the time, this was 10 years or so years ago, that the way to go out and shoot 2 minutes of news footage was to send out a van with a camera guy, an audio guy, a lighting guy, they were generally guys, a makeup, presenter, producer, driver, half a dozen people to shoot 2 minutes However, although many of us involved in local TV in the early days of different experimental licenses, we did all make mistakes. Actually, we all knew we were there to make mistakes, and I don't think that's why we failed. The whole purpose of our licenses really was to try and work out for ourselves what worked, what didn't, what the model was, and we all refined. We all learned from our errors. I went and looked at how different local TV overseas business models overseas. We all plagiarised each other's business models. We got it down eventually to a fine art where we had a handful of video journalists working, producing slick, didn't look like homemade TV, slick news programmes that we were showing on rotation, other programmes. I actually think I can demonstrate to anyone who's concerned about the quality of it, we really got it, in my view, down to the point where it was on a sensible cost base. Now, it's worth explaining what the licences were that we were given, because the last Conservative government, when it was in office, in the sort of dying days of the Major administration, decided it was going to introduce local TV. And it introduced what they called restricted service licences, which were based around spare analogue frequencies. The idea was that in each area they might try and squeeze out an extra channel that you could literally tune into free-to-air on a normal TV. You literally just tune it in, you don't need a set-top box, it's an analogue television channel. It was a very good idea. The problem with it is that they'd just introduced Channel 5, which had used up all of the spare analogue spectrum that was left, and you'll remember they had to go into homes to retune video. So there was the frequencies that were allocated by the regulator, who is now sat on our panel. But the frequency,
I went through the list, and I thought that Oxford was the worst.
I have to say that we always used to say in Oxford that we were fortunate to have one of the better ones, in that if you sort of squinted through the thick, boggy, sort of snowy picture, you could just about make out a ghost in the background. And you didn't therefore need to sort of go and get a new aerial and point it in a different direction. However, you did switch these services, these transmitters on, and you realised that a large proportion of the population you thought you were serving weren't going to be able to see the picture. And that is, I think, to be fair, one of the major flaws in the original RSL regime. Having said that, people did actually sit there and watch the ghost in the background. And we did actually, it was a very challenging sell when you were trying to explain to advertisers this. But people did actually find that when they tried the service, they got responsive. We were, even by our own standards, we were quite surprised by the fact that we were getting viewers to this service, and reasonable numbers when we were doing research. The other thing to point out is that when the licences were originally issued, they were 2-year licences. Now, to be fair, it was always intended that they would be renewed and further extended, and they were. But it was nevertheless, it did take a brave investor. We did get investors, but it did take a brave investor to put money into a service, knowing that there was a definite end date of 2 years and no guarantee, no 100% guarantee that it was going to further be extended. The other thing is, it was an analogue license, and this was at the time when everyone's being encouraged to get digital TV. So every single year, the one thing you knew is that your audience was diminishing as people were switching over towards digital, even assuming that people could actually watch your service. So I would say we, as organisations in the early days of local TV, we made a number of mistakes. I'd say the regulator made, I think there were flaws in the regulatory regime. The regulator made a number of mistakes. I would still say, however, that the one real lesson we learned out of it is that there were only a handful of us doing it, but we did keep going until the point when clearly no one was watching analogue TV anymore. We were still there, we found a way through it, we kept going, we were passionate about it, we were in control of our own destiny, it still happened. If you actually look at where local TV really went wrong in the last 10 years, is that the majority of RSL licences were acquired at the height of the dot-com boom by a group called LBG, the Local Broadcasting Group. And their philosophy, which is familiar to some people in this room, is that running your own local TV channel is too challenging, you can't do it on your own, you can't have a standalone local TV service. What you need to do is to maximise your synergies and your benefits and have the cost efficiencies of being part of a much larger group, and we'll take care of a larger amount of your costs for you, and they came knocking on our door and lots of other people's doors. You ended up with the vast majority of RSLs being controlled by one company. And of course, as we know, when that company's business model didn't work, every single one of those RSLs without exception was dead. It just didn't happen. So actually, I think my one major lesson, if I had to choose one from the last 10 years, is you've got to come up with a business model, and you've got to actually be prepared to stand on your own 2 feet, and don't be reliant upon a fairy godmother who says they're going to make it all easy for you.